entertain the tourists. After they got too big for the enclosure, we found a zoo that accepted them.
During high school, in addition to working in the station, I participated in band and orchestra, playing the trumpet and the violin. During my college years, I would often play with big bands around the area at dances. After high school, I was torn about what I wanted to do with my life. In 1940 to 1941, I attended the University of Wyoming as a freshman. That same year, on April 8, 1941, I signed up with the Aero Industries Technical Institute for an airplane craftsman theory at home and shop course. The course was completed April 3, 1942. World War II began on December 7, 1941. My stepfather, George Fryer, enlisted on April 9, 1942. I married Dorothy L. Little on April 19, 1942. We were high school sweethearts, and I wanted to get married before I went into the service. I then enlisted on September 3, 1942. When I entered the Army, I went for training and was then stationed at Fort Warren in Cheyenne, Wyoming. My firstborn son, Charles Lee, was born at Fort Warren in Cheyenne on February 9, 1943. Dorothy and I were living in Cheyenne.
Like so many young people at that time, we married because of World War II, so that Keith would have a family before he went off to the war where he might be killed. Here is a part of a letter I wrote to Keith from Cheyenne in March 1944. I'm sure glad you had an interesting time Sunday. I read that part to Mom and Dad as I knew I couldn't tell it as well as you had written it. I seem to be getting all your letters as I have one postmarked every day since the 19th. I get them in bunches of 2 and 3, but I get them, and that's what really counts. You write about summer, and it looks like winter has just begun here. It has been awfully cold here all week, and tonight it started to snow again, and within 20 minutes there was an inch. I'm going to send the radio box sometime the last of this week, whenever I can get it ready. I'm glad you can take it with you. It will help pass a few of the hours anyway. My little monthly party started this eve. I thought you might be interested in it this month. Till we're together again, I won't even have any hopes in it stopping, but I guess it's best you and I don't have any more until after the war is over. I'm sure glad I have Charles, and I'm sure not going to farm him out so I can work. I at least want him to know he has a mother, even if his daddy can't be near. Today when he woke up from his nap, he stood up in his crib and said, "Dada." He may have been looking at your picture. I have it on the dresser so he can see it from his bed. Well, dearest, I have jumbled on and on tonight. I was just sort of in the writing mood, but anyway, it gives me pleasure to write to you. I go to bed with a good feeling, as if I'm not letting you down. It sort of seems like I'm talking to you instead of just writing. Night for now. A big hug and kiss from Charles and I both. He sure does try to love me when he is tired. It gives me a warm feeling all over and makes me feel more and more all the time like a mother. Your loving son and wife, Charles and Dorothy. My mother and father, Georgia and Merle Little, were in Cheyenne where my dad worked in the Union Pacific engine repair shops during the war. They helped me take care of Charles Lee. The way we came to Saratoga was that my father came from Lamar, Missouri to Saratoga in 1937. He had worked for a plumbing business in Lamar, run out of his dad's old blacksmith shop. But it was the Great Depression and work was thin. He first found work on Bill Horn's ranch, formerly owned by Charles Merritt Wilcox. My mother and I lived with Grandma and Grandpa Jones in Lamar until housing could be arranged, and at the end of the school year we came to Saratoga by train. Keith's family, of course, was well established here by the time we came. We lived in Cheyenne until Keith was stationed in Hopewell, Virginia. All 3 of us were there until he went to India. This is our Christmas card from that year.
Here's a letter I wrote to Keith and Dorothy from Williams Field in January 2nd, 1944. Dear kids, Clara sent me your address, so I'll let you know I'm still on the job. My furlough is like a dream now, and I get pretty restless at times. Believe me. We're still working 12 hours a day, and that doesn't help my disposition any. They're flying night and day here, and we're swamped at all times. We just get used to working on one plane, and they change to another make, and we have to learn all over again. Clara called me last night. She has to have her tonsils out this morning, and I sort of worried all day. You kids are about as far from home as you can get, are you not? And still be in the U.S.? I told Clara I was glad you were staying together as long as possible. I wish I had made arrangements to have Clara with me when I came in, as this is a hell of a way for married folk to live. Believe me. How is the boy making out these days? Good, I hope. Well, kids, keep well and happy, as that is the main things in this life. With love, George.
I'm George Fryer's sister, Olive, but I am called Pink, a nickname I got when I was very small. I took training as a nurse and worked as one until the war. During World War II, I tried unsuccessfully to sign up as a military nurse. I ended up staying in Saratoga and running the Hard and Cattle Company. I'll read you a letter my brother George wrote to me from Williamsfield, where he was working on airplane engines. I have just got back to camp from a 3-day pass which I spent in Phoenix with Clara, and was it ever hot. We couldn't get a real cool room, but made out okay. I don't think we will be at the field very long, and if so, not in this outfit, as I think there is a big move coming up. I want to thank you for the Luckies. Clara brought me 4 cartons. Now these from you, Rusty, and Killiam's. Also a pint of Old Taylor from Rusty. My buddies and I just finished it. Write me the news, and thanks again for the smokes. As ever, George. Letters were important to all of us. They were how we stayed in touch. Clara wrote George every day.
During World War II, I was responsible for every aspect of the station, including gas and tires. There was gas rationing, and that affected life in Saratoga. I'll read you some of the letters I sent to George during this period of time. It may interest you. October 27, 1945. Dearest George, read yours of yesterday. Do hope you can make it home next week. We mounted 2 700 by 156 ply tires for Dr. Corbett, and boy, they were tough. Then we had a couple flats to fix for Charles Gould, and we had 3 grease jobs and 3 oil changes. A California Chevrolet and Bob Martin Jr.'s. Today is the auxiliary annual dance. So few, got to help. I promised Mabel I would sell tickets for supper. 'Twill give me a chance to go home and clean up after we lock up, and I'll go down and help through supper time. Note added the next morning. I sold Wallace Barnes a battery last eve. It is the last W115 we have, but I didn't reorder, for I thought maybe you wanted to deal with another company. They have never answered my letter to Jay's station having Westrick's batteries. We did awfully well at the supper last night. Took in $64.90 on supper and $161.30 on dance. Sold every chance on the treasure chest, and Austin Reels got it. Then the quilt we had raffled, Mr. Little got. Very few members were there to help, so I was glad I went over. The radio said storm, and it feels that way. I hope it doesn't. I made the statements up until today and have the gasoline report ready. The tires Doc turned in are too good to not do something with, so as Fred W. needs them, I asked Doc about letting him have them. So Fred gave him $15 for the two. I am sending them in for recap for Fred, and we'll get the recapping price out of them. I have it all fixed up if an inspector should show. It looks like rationing might be off in December. I hope. My love, Clara.
Even though I was not able to be a nurse and was running the cattle company, I still was interested in supporting the troops, and therefore I wrote letters to servicemen. I struck up quite a correspondence with George's stepson, Keith. I believe he trusted me with information he shared with no one else. I'll read you a letter Keith wrote to me from Upper Assam, India, on Sunday afternoon, February 25th, 1945. Dear Pink, just a bit of a note today to thank you for the lovely Christmas greeting, the nice socks which you enclosed in a package of Dorotha's, and the long letter you dated February 2nd. I really enjoyed reading both letters. Letters from you are more welcome than any others I receive, except, of course, those from Dorotha and Mother. Dorotha very rarely writes any news, so your ratty and very newsy letters are very welcome indeed. Thanks for each and every letter you've written. I have set up my own darkroom in a tent here, so I'll try to send you some snapshots of the countryside and the people before long. Materials are hard to get over here, but it is a swell pastime and one learns to figure out ways of overcoming snags. So you've got to do some deer hunting last fall, eh? There is some good deer country as well as an abundance of jungle animals within driving distance of here, but I have never had time or necessary transportation to be able to go out. There is a good possibility of my getting to drive a convoy over the Burma Road before long, but I haven't written Mother for fear she might worry, so please don't tell her. That is just a little secret between Dorotha, I, and you, okay? Guess I had better sign off for now, Pink. Write me another letter whenever you have a spare moment. Love as ever, Keith.
In January 1944, Dorotha and Charles were in Hopewell, Virginia with me. By August of 1944, I was in Upper Assam, India. I wanted to be involved in the fighting, but I was assigned to the work of a quartermaster because my typing skills were much in demand. In camp, we had a pet tiger named Sugar. I rode elephants. One treat we used to make from my time there, I kept as a habit and taught my children. We would take our empty jelly cans and, so we didn't waste it, we would put in torn-up bread pieces and a little milk and mix it with the jelly on the sides of the can. It was tasty, and all the jelly was eaten that way. As I wrote in a letter in February 1945, I had hopes of driving with a convoy over the Burma Road soon. By the end of May 1945, I still had not. I did get that wish before the war ended. Here I am pictured with the truck I drove. The war in Europe ended May 1945, and by this time, most of Japan's troops had been pulled back to defend Japan. Japan surrendered September 2nd, 1945.
I wrote a letter to Keith December 2nd, congratulating him on his new stripe. Keith, you should try to enjoy the scenery of that country if possible, and sort of set in your mind so you can tell us about it. It will be a wonderful thing to be able to tell Charles all about it when he gets to the age where stories interest him. So keep in mind that this war won't last forever, and someday you will be home and can tell us all about your travels and experiences. I'm afraid I will never get across, so I'll have to sit it out here in Williams Field. I suppose I should feel lucky, but I don't. I feel as though I've been cheated a second time, and the sacrifice, both financially as well as physically, is too great for no further than I have gone. Now, as to your future plans, Keith, it's hard to tell now what things will be like after we get home. I have planned to enlarge the station and go out after more business. Also, your mother and I are getting to the age where we cannot hit the ball as we once did. It would be hard to come to an agreement as to the value of the business and so forth. But when you and Dorothy have made up your minds as to what you want and expect as your future, we will come to some sort of agreement. There's one thing, though. I built it up through long, hard days and expect to have a say-so. My motto of prompt and courteous service and cleanliness would have to be followed. If I'd let your mother do the thinking, there never would have been a Friars service station. The price of the lot alone had her fluffed. Now, on the other hand, if you feel that you would like to go further through the university, I am sure that can be arranged. If you're going to the station business, I can't see where any more education is necessary. However, if you want to go to something else, there's no doubt that a degree will help you. After all, Keith, you must remember that it is you that has to earn the living for you and your family.
Stalin begins the purges in 1933. 1.5 million people die, an average of 1,000 executions a day. Among those who die, every village loses their traditional storytellers. Stalin's goal is to change the culture completely. George Orwell publishes Animal Farm in 1945, an anti-Soviet satire with Stalin and Trotsky featured as two pigs. In 1949, he publishes 1984, a book that describes what life would be like if the government controlled every detail of a person's life.
The Oddfellows, Masons, and other organizations had lofty goals and achieved them, but it was also true that the meetings were places where the men could gather to drink. A man was expected to be able to hold his liquor, and was looked down on if he couldn't. Public drinking of alcohol was common for men and not at all common for women. Excess drinking was considered a moral failure. The idea of alcoholism being a disease was in infancy during this time. Alcoholics Anonymous was founded in the late 1930s. The Big Book first published in 1939 during World War II. With AA and programs like it, we began to understand the seriousness of the disease and the extreme difficulty of achieving lifelong recovery. In the early years, the figure was around 50% being able to stay sober. Today, 1 of 4 will manage complete sobriety. Another 1 of 4 will have partial sobriety, going in and out of treatment. These are high percentages for recovery from a lethal illness. It is useful to remember that members of this family would not have known any of this information until later in their lives.
President Franklin Delano Roosevelt's New Deal results were patchy. What really restarted the economy was the arms program after 1941. The financial community knew now, if not before, that wars made money, and we had a moral cause to contain Hitler. Hitler's advisors were clear on the war economy as well. Annexing territory and building the military would improve Germany's financial situation. This period saw the entrenchment of the modern military-industrial complex. In the early decades of the 21st century, the permanent war economy is still in place.
During the war, I wrote to Keith every day, and he wrote to me and sent pictures. He was always interested in photography, taking and developing pictures. Keith told me in these letters that he wanted to come home, move to Laramie, finish school, including law school, be a lawyer, and go into politics. This was not a life I could imagine for myself. I didn't want to leave Saratoga.
We were all just doing our duty. I did the job I was given to do, and my mother did her best for morale. Dorotha helped Clara at the gas station and at the post office. It was what was expected of us. The men go to war, the women stay home and take care of the businesses, the farms, the children, and grow the victory gardens, roll bandages, manage the rationing. In reality, many of the women went to work in the factories and, like Pink and my mother Clara, ran the family businesses.
I knew when the war ended I would ask Keith for a divorce. I'm very proud of the fact that I never wrote Keith a Dear John letter. If he didn't return from the war, he would never know of my change of heart, and during the fighting he would never be troubled and would be able to focus on staying alive. It was only after the war was over that I told him. Up until the end of World War II, divorce was very uncommon.
I was released from the Army on January 9th, 1946. As soon as I arrived back in the States, I received a letter from Dorotha saying she was filing for divorce. The divorce was granted on March 20th, 1946. On January 28th, 1946, I went to work for United Airlines in Cheyenne as a timekeeper.
I was distressed when Dorotha decided to divorce Keith. My second husband, George, never adopted Keith legally, although he filled the role of father in our family. I wanted Keith to keep the name Wilcox for Lee's parents, Charles Merritt and Mary Hoyt Wilcox. George agreed with that decision. Keith and I determined that Charles Lee would remain a Wilcox as well, and Dorotha agreed.